Lili Boulanger's Prelude in D-flat, originally written for piano, has this wonderfully ethereal texture that she masterfully displays through the piano. This can make the piece an alluring playground for orchestration. In this quick mini-lesson, we will dive into practical tips that you can use to bring your music to life. Personally, I follow these principles anytime I'm writing for an ensemble. Let's take a look at this excerpt from measure 11 of the Boulanger. Let's focus on that right hand. At first glance, the many notes and whole step dissonances can be overwhelming. However, if we just split up the notes based on how they will ring with the pedal down, we can create two layers that can be split across instruments. We have this offbeat figure that splits into 3 notes, and this downbeat figure that splits as well. It's important to note that how you create your reductions is also up to interpretation. Depending on how you hear it, you could interpret the high notes as phrasing through the octave leap, like this. However, this may start to create doubling and balance issues when you start divvying up the parts around the orchestra. If you're ambitious and patient enough, there's almost always a solution or compromise you can make. Many of the tips in this video will still apply. For now, let's keep the original breakdown. Let's focus on the offbeat one first. If we were to create a very basic string split without divisi, we can simply spread the parts from lowest to highest. Based on the character of the passage, I'd say strings with mutes will likely give the ghostly quality we are looking to convey. But what if we want a richer, more colorful texture? The winds will help with that. However, the most important guideline we must consult as we start spreading across the ensemble is understanding what part of the instrument's range we are writing in. Certain areas of an instrument's range will not only help us determine what color and quality we will hear, but also whether or not that note will be appropriate to the dynamic that we choose. In the case of the Boulanger, for each note, we're looking for the instruments that can comfortably play that note at a piano dynamic, and also sits in their more dull and non-piercing range. This requires a solid understanding of what character and color you want before you start notating. Some of the instruments we can assign to the F4 in the lower split is the trumpet, clarinet, violins, and viola. We could also experiment with flute. However, this F may not be carrying enough in the flute. Remember? Comfortable, dull, and non-piercing. I'm going to stick with the trumpet, with the straight mute. I'm a sucker for brass colors. The G4 in the middle split is only a whole step away from the F. However, since the F is the primary repeating note, and the G is the dissonance, we have to be cognizant of whether we are writing the dissonant as stronger, weaker, or of equal strength to the primary note. In this case, I want the dissonance to be a little weaker. Why? It's a bit of a personal preference. I don't want the G to overpower the F, but I also hear the G as more of a faint aftertaste, like a Neapolitan ice cream, but I taste a little more chocolate as opposed to strawberry and vanilla. Using the same list of instruments as the F, I choose the clarinet. It has that subtle color that I'm looking for in this range. Now for the top split, E-flat 5. The list of instruments that will have the right character in this range is quite a bit smaller. In fact, the only instrument I can think of would be the flute, since the E-flat sits quite low in its range. Some other instruments we could consider would be clarinet or violin. For this specific excerpt, I would personally avoid the oboe, since its tone could overpower the balance. However, it's still good to keep in mind a good oboe player in this range could likely subdue the tone, resulting in a different texture. However, in terms of general orchestration principle, may be best avoided unless you're willing to take that risk. That being said, let's use flute in this example. So let's take a listen to the offbeats with our instruments of choice. Now that we have determined all the choices, the fun part is now choosing where they will go permanently. This, of course, requires a great deal of patience and experimentation. The most important factor to anticipate is that context may require you to change your mind. Remember, we are focused on 3 measures of just the right hand. Whatever comes before, or next, or whatever the other hand or part is playing may require you to move things around, make compromises, or expand the instrumentation. Turning our attention to the downbeat figure, there are again lots of different ways to split this. In my orchestration I posted on my channel a little while back, I used pizzicato and the high strings. However, in retrospect, I'm not quite satisfied with the effect. Pizzicato just isn't loud enough to balance with the droning offbeats, especially in this range of the strings. So instead, let's try a version where the strings are muted and playing arco. Now that's a little more like it. It feels much more melodic like this. Again, depending on the context, you may want to experiment with mixing rules, like maybe having flute take one of the splits. Bonus points, maybe in order to achieve that pluck of the piano hammers, let's try doubling the violin and flute in divisi pizzicato. We can do this by splitting the violin too into divisi. Lovely. This arrangement is really coming together. We only touched on 3 measures, but this right here is the principle of well thought out, creative arranging. Use these tips for any piano reduction you want to bring to life. I highly recommend, as a practice, taking piano reductions of already well-known arrangements, such as Ravel's Take on Pictures at an Exhibition, and taking a crack at your own orchestration. That way, once you're done, you can compare and contrast what you did with masters of the craft. Thank you for taking the time to listen. Please give the video a like and subscribe if you're so inclined. I will definitely be doing more stuff like this.